Hi, everybody. As you come back from spring break, I hope you are revitalized at least for a few days before you begin trudging ahead through the fourth quarter to the end of the year. I wanted to send out a few useful tips to you to help close up your Google Classrooms and clean things up in your Drive and Calendar so that when you begin your next year, you're not trying to clean up a big mess that we created this year. One of the first things that you could do to help clean up your classroom and Drive a little bit is to return all of your students' work. Throughout the year, as students turn work in and it's graded through Google Classroom, it's a good idea and a good practice to make sure that you're returning that work. And when you head to your To Review section, you will see that you've got two tabs here, To Review and Reviewed. This will be sort of your hub of showing you everything that's been assigned, whether it's got a due date or whether it has no due date. And when you look at these things, you can go through and see anybody that's turned in work that you have not reviewed yet, or anybody that's just been assigned that work and hasn't done it yet. And so one good practice is to make sure that you return all of this work that's been turned in so that you see a 0 in this column. One of the reasons that you want to do this is when a student turns in work to you, it actually changes the ownership rights of that file. And so if you have 17 turned in assignments that you have not returned, those 17 assignments have made you the owner, and they are now in your Google Drive, so that if you ever delete them, those students cannot access the work that they created. So to easily go through each assignment and do this, you do not necessarily need to go to each specific student. You can click on the Turned In section, and you will notice that off to the left-hand side, Google Classroom separates it into Turned In, Assigned, and then you might even see Missing below that. And you can simply go ahead and click Turned In, and even if it's not graded, you can go ahead and return it here, and that will then change that to a 0 in this column. Once you have a 0 in this column, you can then click on the 3 dots and mark it reviewed. That will remove it from this list and put it in your reviewed section. The second tip, again, which is totally optional, that you may want to consider, is actually not just archiving your classes, but before you do that, unenrolling your students. If you take a look at a class, normally when you archive a class, what that will do is it will allow students to still access it, but nobody can change any information. So you can't, as a student, submit a new assignment. You can't change permissions to a file. All you can do is view the information that was in that class, including old assignments. So you may not want students to have access to this, especially if those classes are going to be taught down the line and you don't want any of those assignments or test information shared with other students in the future. And to simply unenroll your students, you can go into any class, go to the People tab, and then you can select this box here under Students, which will auto-select everyone. And then you go to Actions, and you can then simply remove them. Again, you don't have to do this, but if you want your students to not have access to your archived class, you'll want to unenroll them so that they can't look at that information or possibly share that information with other students in the future. Another helpful tip to prepare for those classes that you teach more than once, whether it's a repeated class over quarters or semesters or even years, is to create a copy or a template of that class. And even though there are some items that don't copy over, there's definitely value in doing this. And you can copy a class by going to the 3 dots, clicking Copy, and it will automatically copy the title, section, subject, and location, and you can click Copy here. And when you do this, the list of things that will copy over to a new class are these pieces of information, but also, more importantly, the topics and the classwork posts, including assignments and questions. And I'll show you that in just a minute. The things that will not copy over are things like teacher announcements, deleted classwork items, no students or co-teachers will be included, student posts will be removed, and any attachments that you don't have permission to copy. So what this would look like in a copy of a class is now you have this new class. There are no people in there, but under the classwork tab, all of your topics have been copied over, and all of your assignments and other classwork items have been copied over as well as drafts. So now when you get to the next class, you can just click on this and you can edit, and there's really no reason to add anything unless you needed an attachment you didn't have permission to. Now you can change the due date, select your topics, and you can assign that much more easily. Number 4, and this to me is one of the biggest and most important tips to keep your classroom decluttered, is to actually archive your old classes. When you go to the class main page here, you'll see all your tiles, and if you are co-teachers in a bunch of classes, you're going to see that it gets pretty messy. Always do be aware that, remember, you can drag these in any order you want, so you can put the ones you use most at the top. But when you are done with them, it's a great idea to archive your classes. Archiving your classes does a few things. First of all, it removes that tile from your main page. It also freezes the class, so no new changes by you or the students can be made. But it still allows you to copy and reuse posts from those archived classes in any new or updated classes that you create. To archive these classes, you're going to click on these 3 dots, and you simply hit Archive. And it'll give you a little notice here, and you can say Archive. And what that will do is it will put this in your archived section that can be found all the way at the bottom of your menu, Archived Classes, and you'll see there it is. You can then, if you ever wanted to restore it, you go ahead and just click those 3 dots, more options, and you hit Restore, and that will put it right back in your main class page. Remember that when you restore, any students that have not been removed or unenrolled from that class will be able to be active in that class again. So that is one more reason that you may want to consider unenrolling those students first. One more tip to declutter is actually how it has more to do with how your Google Classroom is tied with your Google Calendar. And inside of every single Google Classroom, and you can see this under the Classwork tab, it is connected to a Google Calendar. When you create a classroom, it automatically creates a Google Calendar for that classroom. And it's really nice because when you assign work and give due dates, any students that are attached to this Google Calendar can actually see what's coming up on their calendar, not just in Classroom. But when you're done with these classes, you want to get rid of these things, you want to hide them, because otherwise you have a lot of calendars, especially if you're using Classroom year after year. So you can either go to Classroom through that link, or you could always hit your Google Apps waffle button and find Calendar. And you'll notice down here in my calendars, I've got a lot of calendars here from classes back in 2016 all the way to current. And, we've got Test Class 1 here, different English classes. These are things I don't need anymore, and there are a few different ways that we can get rid of them. One is that you can simply unsubscribe from them. Unsubscribing from a calendar just takes it off your list, but it doesn't necessarily delete it. So if your students hit unsubscribe, it just means they're not going to get any of the notices when things are updated anymore, but it doesn't actually delete the calendar, especially since you're the owner. You could also click these 3 dots, and you could hide it from the list. The calendar is still there, but it's hidden so that you don't have all of this, and there's nothing wrong with that option as well. But say that you're someone who wants it gone completely. You can then hit Settings and Sharings, and you're going to go all the way down. Notice that these are all your calendars you can choose. My Can Win from last year is selected, and I'm going to go all the way down to Remove Calendar. Again, you can unsubscribe, which was the same as that little X, or you can completely delete it. And remember, when you delete it, it will be permanently erased, and anyone who is connected with that calendar, it will no longer be visible for them as well. And because this is an old calendar, I'm going to go ahead and permanently delete that, and then it removes it from your list. So if you want to keep not only your Google Classroom clean, but anything tied to Google Classroom, even in your calendar, this is how you can either unsubscribe, hide, or delete your old Google Classroom calendars. Another tip for cleaning things up related to Google Classroom, but this time not in Calendar, more in your Google Drive, is to actually take a look at your Google Classroom Drive folder. Every time that you create a new classroom, you should have a classroom folder that was automatically created for you, and it will place the new classroom folder inside this. A lot of people have a hard time finding this because you didn't create it on purpose. The very first time that you ever signed up for Google Classroom, it could have been 5 years ago, it could have been this year, you should have had this folder created. Some people accidentally delete this. Some people accidentally rename this. We can help you find it if you need to, but one good practice is to find this folder and click on it. Inside, you're going to see all of the Google Classrooms that you have. And that can get pretty overwhelming, especially if you use it year after year. And so one good practice that I've put into place, and you could do this different ways, is that every single year I make a new folder. And as my classes are archived, I will select the classes, and you can hold down Shift and just select what you need to, and you can drag them into the years that you want. So these will be all 2021, so I'm going to drag them in here, and I could do that for the rest of the classes as well. So this is something that you can do in order to help keep your Google Classrooms a little bit cleaner inside your Google Drive. The way that these are organized is that every single Google Classroom has its own folder. And so you can go into that folder, and then every single assignment or piece of classwork that you've assigned has its own folder as well. And inside this, you can open it up, and you will see all of the assignments that students have turned in. This is where you returning students' work gets kind of important because it will change the ownership. You'll notice that 3 assignments in here have been returned to the students. So if I wanted to remove these, I can do that. Notice here it says remove, and I just right-click to find that menu. However, I did not return this one to my test student 4, and if I want to try to remove this, it will actually delete the file, and that student, that test student 4 or whoever, will never be able to find that file again because I own it and I'm actually deleting it. When they own it, you are just removing it from your drive. So that's another option, to clean up your classroom folders and to even go inside those assignments themselves and remove some of those files. I don't necessarily remove the files. We have pretty near unlimited storage, but it is a good practice to at least clean them up into something like an archived folder that you create or year folders. That's totally up to you. Some people also like to create a folder of exemplary work where they go into their Google Classroom, they find a piece of work that was turned in by a student that was a really, really good example, and they want to make a copy of that and place it in exemplary work so that next year or the next time you teach that same class, not only can you post the assignment and post your instructions, but you could also post an example of exactly what you're looking for and a couple great pieces of work done from students in the past. I hope that you find these tips useful. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out through email, comments, or my extension 2162, and I'll be glad to help. Thanks, everybody.